really troubling what's taking place in some communities there. Let's attempt to get to the bottom of what actually underpins gangsterism in some of those Cape Flats areas. Research associate at the Center for Criminology at UCT is Dr. Simon Howell, who joins us now via our video link. And Dr. Howell, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. You and your colleagues, I imagine, have spent a lot of time trying to unpack what actually underpins the violent culture that allows gangsterism to fester the way it does. What's your initial take about even our characterization of the problem? Is this a community issue, a violence issue, a citywide issue? I imagine a combination of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is ultimately a combination of those. Primarily, it is a society issue in the sense that the way in which we respond to gangsterism has not worked, and the way in which we've left the actual underlying causes of gangsterism to continue to exist continues to make this a problem. I think we primarily focus on the police and the military as a means of intervening in gang-related incidences or drug-related incidences. And while they may have a role to play, I don't think they should be the primary or only response that we seem to, have against these issues.
Yeah, we interestingly saw there from my colleague Atim Tongana's package, community members, women to be more specific, kind of leading the charge of what a kind of community response there should be. To what extent do you think that would help? Because I've always been under the impression that community members know where the gangsters are and in some instances are responsible for protecting them.
Yeah, so I mean, I think community-based responses have a significant role to play in responding to gangsterism, but so too does, the bringing in or the integration of communities into the wider socioeconomic sphere of the city and the country itself. So, a lot of these communities are marginalized and isolated. There is few job opportunities. There is little social there are few social layers, so to speak, in which people can find jobs or find a sense of community. And as such, this is where gangsterism steps in and becomes a means of providing a lot of young men with an identity and with, a sense of belonging. So while community responses obviously have a great role to play and can play a role there, they can't operate in a vacuum or an economic vacuum or a social vacuum in which there are few services or there's few chances for people to obtain jobs or, find economic employment.
Right. There's also what feels like a strange duality about Cape Town. I mean, on the one hand, it's home to some of the most attractive tourism destinations ranked by global organizations, whilst on the other, it is also where you'll find some of the most dangerous communities in the world, quite frankly. To what extent do you reckon this duality, I guess, makes it difficult for us as a country to constantly regard what's happening in some of those Cape Flats communities as something to be attended to urgently more than anything else?
Well, I think it's indicative of the ongoing sort of divides which structure society, or South African society. We are very unequal in so many ways. And as a result, gangsterism flourishes in areas which have been ignored both by the government and by society as a whole. And, it's easy to sort of focus on these things once in a while when there are lots of murders or when, it becomes newsworthy. But ultimately, gangsterism continues to flourish irrespective of that. And until such time as we find ways of more equally dividing up the city, so to speak, by making it more accessible to everyone, gangsterism essentially is playing a role because it has stepped into the vacuum created by the state itself and its failure to provide essential services and basic human rights, essentially, to a lot of people in the city.
Yeah. When we entered our democratic dispensation, there was a lot of talk about there being some kind of lost generation in the country. I imagine, there should be something to be said about children who are growing up in this kind of context in Cape Flats communities where we're told in some instances they've become so accustomed to gunshots that they can actually distinguish gunshots that are fired into the air and those that are fired towards people. I mean, have we even quantified the kind of impact this is having on children?
Well, yeah. So, there are severe levels of trauma in many of these communities amongst everyone. The levels of violence are such that violence itself becomes almost skewed, and people don't seem to realize or understand how violence should be thought of and what they're experiencing. And as a result, that again speaks to and strengthens the gangs, because in that traumatization, gangs offer a sort of sanctuary and they offer a means of dealing with and doing something about the violence in a very real and tangible way. And again, the problem here is that should we send the police into those communities, they escalate the violence, in the sense of when they're dealing with various issues, they themselves, will be a cause of those gunshots and continue to exacerbate the violence that community members themselves feel. So in this instance, sending the police or sending the military into communities like that serves to reinforce that trauma rather than actually deal with the issues that are at play and which are essentially on which that gangs and gangsterism continues to exist.
Yeah, we do know that militarizing communities doesn't necessarily mean that those communities become any less violent. Dr. Howell, thanks very much indeed for helping us break down what we know so far and perhaps what the interventions should look like. Dr. Simon Howell is a research associate at the Center for Criminology at the University of Cape Town.